Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of This is HCD. My name is Jerry Scullion and I'm your host, and I'm based in the wonderful, very windy today city of Dublin City, Ireland, and I offer training to organisations internationally in service design, user experience design and design research, and also work one-on-one with change makers from all over the world with my 12-week coaching program that I offer through this podcast. So if you're listening to this episode and like This is HCD, then I reckon my program might be something that you're interested in. I've worked with designers from all different levels, from C-level to mid-level, helping them grow both as a practitioner and as a person. So for more information, see the website and schedule a free chemistry call with me. And if anything, it'd be just so cool to connect and get to speak with you. Check the link in the show notes or the description if you're watching this on our YouTube channel. Now, in this episode, I chat with someone who's really special. I chat with Suzanne Hanway, an occupational therapist in Dublin, in Howth in Dublin for anyone who's in Ireland, who works with children who identify as neurodiverse. Now, we met through one of my own children who gets support from her to help my child regulate better. And sitting in on part of these sessions, it always blows my mind. Why exactly? Well, each session is led by the child specifically. It's facilitation mastery, and I really love observing and understanding the science behind the why. So in one of the many conversations that I had with Suzanne over the years, I asked her about the service requirements for children in the present world, so children who are in school at the moment. What does this look like? What's available to those children and the parents currently out there in the world at the moment? And what can we learn from this? Also, what does the future hold when the current generation starts to enter the workforce? What are the things we need to think about? We chat openly about the generations of people who are now in the workforce and what we can do as change makers to better support them. Suzanne is an absolutely incredible practitioner. I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and a wonderful person to boot. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. Let's jump straight in. Look, Suzanne Hanway, I'm delighted to have you on the podcast. I've been asking you to come on this podcast. I was saying to my wife today, nearly a year. I was like, please, Suzanne, come on. Please. I'm very busy, which is a good sign. But maybe we'll start off, maybe tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do.
So I'm Suzanne, and I suppose very lucky to be in the profession that I'm in. I'm an occupational therapist and have been so. As I was thinking about that, I was like, oh my God, 28 years.
28 years.
28 years. So I obviously don't look that old.
No, you only look about 25.
And I kind of started off, and I didn't go into OT straight away. I went into science in UCD, and I started off and loved the sciences, loved it, kind of, the biology side of things, and went into UCD, and I was like, oh my God, it's like cattle market. There's 500 people in the lecture hall.
Yeah.
I'm not really understanding this. I don't understand that. And I'm not getting that connect, And I think that connect has been a hallmark of my career and where I've gone. So anyhow, I switched and applied for OT in Trinity. Well, first of all, I kind of went and visited a couple of places. Spoke with an uncle of mine who has a very significant physical disability, and his first OT was Anne Beckett, who is a niece of Samuel Beckett.
Oh,
and
really?
she was one of the first OTs in Ireland, and she lost one of her legs in an accident, and she was my uncle's OT. And he's very, very kind of affected by his disability in some ways, but what he's achieved is absolutely amazing. And he always spoke so highly, and he said, oh, I think you might like that. Go and visit a couple of OT departments. And I hadn't heard of OT before then.
Yeah.
Looked into the course and went, like that. And it was a heavy course, compared to anyone who was doing their 10 hours a week of lectures. It was 35, 40-hour week lectures, placement, but loved it. Like the minute I did it, I was like, okay. And it was tough, academically tough. And I think something which has happened now that it was the case, it's a match of the person. You're seeing people maybe go into OT, not always, it's quite high points. And they might academically be really, really gifted, but I think the personality of the person is hugely important to our profession.
Yeah. Let's just back up there a little bit on the OT point, because Some people listening will be like, what is OT? How would you
Million dollar question.
describe what occupational therapy is? Because I remember hearing about it when I was studying 20 years ago. And I was like, occupational therapy, is that something that happens in the workplace where how you're
Yeah.
sitting, or like some sort of, rehabilitation?
A lot of people don't understand it. I think they
Mm,
do think of the word occupation and it's to do with getting a job. Where I suppose the principle of OT, it looks at occupational performance areas. So it looks
mm,
at a day, it looks at life and what you do within that day. It's your work, if you're obviously in a job, it's your education, if you're a child, it's your play, it's your leisure, it's your activities of daily living. So they're your
mm,
occupational performance areas. And then an OT looks at how an illness, how a disability, how maybe a neurodivergence affects your performance in that area and looks at ways to either adapt, compensate, or develop your skills. And again, it
mm,
very much depends what clinical area you work in. I obviously work in the area of kind of younger children,
mhm.
children in care. It'd be very different my work day compared to if I was in, Beaumont or a hospital, much more of
Absolutely.
a rehab area.
Now, a lot of the listeners to this podcast in particular are designers, are change makers, so they'd probably be classified as creatives.
Yeah.
They're all throwing their eyes up to heaven. I can see them now. But a lot of those people and a lot of my peers at the moment, it seems to be over the last 5, 10 years, a lot of people have been assessed for things. A lot of my peers are now discovering that they maybe have ADHD or just generally neurodivergent.
Mm.
I'd love to get your take on a description of what neurodivergence is. And then we'll come up with the second question is, and what are the kind of challenges that you see that neurodivergence, people with neurodivergence have in their daily lives?
I think first and foremost, there's a shift with the understanding of neurodivergence.
Mm.
Um,
And acceptance.
and acceptance. It's not you need to be fixed. It's like, this is
Yeah.
who I am. And there is a big shift. There's even a shift in clinical practice about, in a couple of years' time, are we going to have all these different diagnostic categories anymore? Or are we just going to have the term neurodivergent? Are we going to have DCD, which is obviously, some people might know it as dyspraxia, developmental coordination disorder, ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, ADHD, all of those kind of come under neurodivergent. I think we're
Mm.
seeing it's always been there, but it's never being connected to the same way that it has now. I think we'll all look back in our past and we go, oh, maybe I'm a bit neurodivergent. I definitely am.
Mm.
And we look at people in our class and they're maybe just labeled, they were labeled different. They
Yeah.
maybe had mental health issues, but there definitely is a shift to label things more. Um, I think in a couple of years' time, it won't be that, because there is more of a shift as well in accepting the person. And I very much do that within practice. It's not someone is coming to me to be fixed. It's
Yeah.
about giving them insights into, well, that's why that's hard for you. You get really overloaded by sensory information,
Mm.
and here's some strategies that might help. So it's learning strategies to manage that neurodivergence and to navigate.
Yeah.
And it can make navigating things a little bit more challenged when you don't understand it. But I
Mm.
always think it's when you understand it more, you can navigate it and you can figure out. Some people need to do assessment to figure that out. Other people just go, "Do you know what? I know I maybe have, as in an adult, I know I maybe have a neurodivergence, but I figured out how to navigate that, so I don't need
Sure.
a label." But obviously, some people do
So
go that route.
you mentioned there that a lot of your work is with young children. What are the kind of challenges they face? Because even though the industry within OT has evolved and has accepted the fact that this isn't about being fixed,
Yeah.
society is somewhat behind. So, what are the challenges
I
that
think the
they?
challenges are access to services. Yeah,
Yeah,
even in private practice, it's quite hard to access services,
true,
HSE services. Waiting lists are
crazy.
just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. So the clinical services and the HSE, and there's some fantastic professions within those
Mm,
areas, but waiting lists really are a challenge. I think schools can be a challenge. The more people that can tune into the person's individuality,
yeah,
and I absolutely appreciate teachers of a class of 30 odd kids and they can't always make it.
yeah,
But if they hold that neurodivergence in their head relating to all the kids,
Mm.
that can be really good. So I know for me, I get better outcomes in the work I do when I get that really good connection with the parent, and I
Yeah.
get a really good connection with the school, and the school and the parent get that connection with the child.
Sure.
And really outcomes in intervention are stratospherically different. It's the ones where I'm seeing that, oh, we haven't got the school on board, or maybe mum and dad aren't as tuned into where, their child
Mm.
is at. That really does affect outcome.
Yeah.
So as an
I can
OT, I very
imagine.
much try and coach and empower parents and schools to get that connection, because it's really, really powerful. And any of the research that's coming out now said,
Mm.
getting that connection first and foremost really influence outcome
Yeah.
measures.
Now, on that point, the pressure on schools to
Yeah.
support an additional need, if you want,
Yeah.
from a child. If you had a class of, say, 30 and they were all assessed, how many of those children would you say on average would be neurodivergent?
A third, I would think.
A third, about a third of a class of 10.
Yeah.
So in my year, like when I was in school in the early 80s, all the way through until the mid 90s, there was definitely people that
Mm.
were in my class that would have been neurodivergent, that would have learning disabilities, and they were kind of classified as just being difficult
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
slow or any of
Yeah.
these terms that are very kind of derogatory. Um, but we've noticed a shift that's happened in the last definitely 20 years anyway with my
Mm.
generation of parents. There seems to be an acknowledgement that we could probably better support people. What do you think is behind that? What has caused this kind of universal shift to kind of global understanding that we're all different and we're all unique?
I think research, I think models of practice have evolved. I think the training that teachers and clinicians are getting, is sowing that seed, and it's the ability to reflect and go, what we were doing wasn't working well.
Mm,
You know, Neurodivergence, when it wasn't being supported, when it wasn't being understood, you were seeing the impact in the mental health service. And there's
yeah,
so, I look back to my own, clinical placements within my training and some of my earlier work, and you saw people who had very significant mental health difficulties, and it's because their neurodivergence wasn't
yeah,
understood. So the mental health services then were getting blocked up, and they're going, oh, there's something not quite clicking. We need to go back.
mm.
We need to look at what we were doing from the very beginning. So I think it's a
More of a
shift.
holistic approach and more of a correlation. You could see, well, this generation were relatively unsupported and it's having an
Yeah.
effect in the health services later on in life.
Hugely so. And like you would
Yeah,
see, like even in the prison system, there would be definitely kind of people who would have been maybe on the spectrum who it wasn't picked up, and their social difficulties
yeah,
then were misinterpreted as, oh god, and they were very, very socially maybe vulnerable, and they ended up in situations. So definitely research would show that there are people in the prison system who haven't been diagnosed.
yeah.
So I think there is a plus for diagnosis in very many cases.
Mm,
So being able to kind of understand, say, okay, let's look behind a behavior. And I think that's a key thing that I
sure.
look at in practice and
Yeah.
get parents in schools. Don't just look at the behavior. Why is it there? What is it? What is the intent of that behavior? And if we can figure out the intent, we can shift things rather than a behavioral, oh, we're going to stop it, we're going to reduce
Yeah.
it. In some cases that does work, a more cognitive approach, but when there's a behavior there that has more of an emotional component,
Mm,
our limbic system, and you think of it, the lid, this is very basic. So your limbic system is kind of your thumb, and it's chucked away over your frontal lobe, your executive function.
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if your limbic system is on fire, we flip the lid, and executive function and frontal control is gone. And that's the
Okay.
behavioral sign of things. In very many cases, certainly the cases I would work with. So we go back and we do body-based approaches. We go back and we say, let's support the limbic system. Let's get that regulation, that connect, and we keep the executive function and the limbic system, tucked
Right.
away. It's
Yeah.
like when the child has an absolute meltdown. Language, they're not going to process it. They're not going to hear it. So we need to
Yeah.
let that limbic system settle down, and that frontal part, come back. That's it. It's accessible. So
To
it's
regulate.
why, in some of the work I do with children in care, it's encouraging body-based approaches rather than a cognitive approach.
Okay. Which is like one of the questions that I had for you, like with occupational therapy, the help that you can provide to children.
Mm.
What are some of the activities that you do that maybe teachers or people who work with children can start to incorporate into their practice, so to speak?
Yeah, movements. Movement is absolutely so
Mm.
powerful. You look at maybe a model like Finland where children get movement every 15 minutes.
How
So
do they do this? Like, let's stop on this one a second,
yeah,
because like if you look at a classroom,
but it
there's
could be
30
just even at the desk. It could be let's everyone stand up and shake your hands.
boxing each other.
Yeah, it has to be, and this is where I try and work with teachers and say it doesn't have to be that you're going into the PE hall. It doesn't have to be that you lead the class.
Yeah,
You can have those really quick and easy, shifts and movements then allow the brain to be accessible for learning. So you think of it like filling your cup up. The
yeah.
cup will fill up, and if the child's cup is full, pouring stuff in, it just overflows. So movement sometimes can allow that cup to empty a little bit and for there to be capacity for connection and learning. So really simple, quick movement breaks, even before like a handwriting activity could be everyone shakes their hand out, shake them up, shake them down, stretch them out.
Hmm.
Really, really simple things. And teachers that buy into that and see it as a support for the curriculum definitely have better outcomes of engagement for all the kids, not just kids that are neurodivergent.
Yeah, it's
Like
crazy.
this, even I have to say for me, like I'm sitting with you now and I'm really focused on the screen. I know by the time I'm finished, I need movement.
Yeah,
I need some movement before I go on to something else
something
because I've
else.
really had to focus. I've had to tune everything out to,
Yeah.
to engage. So I think teachers can do that. Um, Bilateral movement, so movement that involves two sides of your body. There's a huge amount of research around how that it supports executive functioning.
Hmm.
Impacts on processing speed, impacts on literacy and numeracy. So having movement that has that bilateral, so it's
Hmm.
using the two sides of your body and crossing over with the
So what
two
would that
sides.
look like if you're to give us an example? I know you've got so many amazing methods. Haven't
Yeah.
seen you in action. What does that look like in terms of methods? Because we're talking about stuff here that you can apply for children, but it's obviously it applies to adults as well. Like I train an awful lot of adults, and I do incorporate some sort of games and
Mm,
activities and movement. Probably not enough though, based on what you're
mm.
telling me here. Like like if we're doing a 6 hour workshop and we're splitting it into segments, there's probably enough opportunity there for all of us change makers to weave some of this thinking into our practice.
Oh, hugely so. So, like a quick and easy thing could be everyone stands up and there's a thing called a cross call where you get your right hand to touch your left knee, you get your left hand to touch your right knee. So you're
Nice.
crossing over that midline, so
You
you're
do the hokey
engaging.
pokey and turn around.
Yeah, do that.
That's what
That's
it's all about, that kind of
like
stuff.
jumping jacks, even something simple like jumping jacks.
Yeah.
That you're using and you watch in a classroom kids doing jumping jacks and you'll go, oh, and you'll see the difficulty some
Yeah.
kids have and some adults have with that bilateral, but there is great power in bilateral based movements, and as opposed to, there's a misconception sometimes that, oh, a game of football can be someone's absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
For a child who gets really overloaded by sensory information, for, a child that struggles maybe in those big noisy groups, a child who
Mm.
doesn't have the coordination, the quick postural control, it's an absolute nightmare for them. And it sends them back to class really dysregulated. So it's knowing what movements will regulate, as in kind of keep you in that nice kind of zone, or what
Sure.
movements can dysregulate and send you up that you go back into class and you're going, oh, I can't focus on my math and my Irish,
That was most of us in school in the
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah, so
Uh,
so I think it's teachers again. I'm a great believer in coaching and empowering people with the knowledge. And when they have the knowledge, I've done work with teachers. They'll go, "Oh, I feel so bad now. I was stopping a child swinging on their chair. Now I know that they just weren't getting enough movement opportunities in the classroom. I'm going to go
yeah.
back and try and do that before a really demanding cognitive task."
Hmm. One of the pieces that I really came to respect was the OT's kind of collaborative nature of wanting to incorporate their learnings with the other disciplines like teachers, the medical professions.
Mm.
But there seems to be a lack of opportunity there, like a system to feed into it. Like it's very broken in those kind of
Mm,
channels.
mm.
So the evidence that you have based on scientific research for a parent to go back to the school or the medical profession, like a doctor and stuff, they're required to be the proxy between all three or four of them. What do you think the future looks like for government services that are more holistic and being able to document and share so you all kind of access the same repository of information?
I think it's challenging. I think
Yeah.
we still have a
Data
long,
challenging as well, probably.
yeah, I think we still have a long way to go. I think it's setting the structures and the standards in place and not
Hmm.
just kind of keeping it too loose and allowing every school to operate. And obviously they do have standards, and that, they're all doing amazingly, but it's to kind of say, okay, you need to pull these people in. So
Yeah,
having a standard so it's not left so loose. So I think there needs to be tighter policies and standards. And there is that shift, but things move so slowly within the public sector and obviously
absolutely.
the private sector as well. I think it's getting in it from a training point of view. So in teacher training, training of medics, training of all
Mm,
the professions that you need in that team, that everyone is on the same page and understands that profession, because we don't always understand the
yeah.
framework, and we need to respect that profession and how we can connect and engage the
Mm,
best. So I think it starts from the really early, the training, and
yeah.
having that framework in place. So if a teacher goes into a school, they know, okay, these are some of the things that I might need to look out for. And it is happening, but it
Mm,
needs to be certainly upped.
yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've basically been working on for the last 9 months, as you know, the Makers and Doers School, because I know you've been interested and
Yeah,
you
no,
all
I thought it was
shared
great.
it out in your own social channels, and I really appreciated that. But the importance of other avenues for children who aren't, say, sporty,
Mm,
who aren't kind of interested in doing the traditional sports like football or tennis or any of these things. They may find it very difficult due to the coordination or just interest.
mm.
What do you think, or do you think, the opportunity lies with the arts and crafts and design generally? What would that give to children, like if it was included much earlier? Because I know other countries in the world, like Finland, they introduce design at a much earlier age. What's the effect on the brain, at the younger brain, by weaving this kind of thinking into it?
Oh, I think it has massive, massive positive impacts. The construction part of our brain is it being fired up, and the ability to
Mm,
develop what we call our praxis skills through play, design, creative activities, and everyone needs to be able to have strong praxis.
yeah,
The term dyspraxia comes from difficulty with the skill of praxis, and praxis is about ideation, getting an idea,
yeah,
sequencing, and doing it. And when we, play with Lego, when we make things, we have to get that ideation, and then we have to sequence all the steps. And this is when I
yeah,
look people, having free play on Lego and not just reading the instructions,
yeah.
and building it. And, I certainly have had some people, you go, oh, and I glued it all together. And you're like, oh my God. Like, so the brain
It'd
gets
send me mad.
stimulated. Like there's
Yeah.
so many parts of the brain that get stimulated by that creative, that ideational play. It's really, really, really powerful. And I think it's
Mm,
really important. And there's definitely a shift in schools in that kind of opportunities and learning as well. I'm a really, really strong advocate um, for the need for really holistic options for sports in school. It shouldn't just be
mm,
PRA, it shouldn't just be rugby, it shouldn't just be soccer, because what you want someone to find a physical outlet that they get their joy from.
mm.
And if we really have it that narrow, children then just, I suppose you get to say, I'm not good at sport. You
Yeah.
just haven't found your sport. Brings me back to my own school days. And God, all our PE teacher did was basketball and rounders, which I was absolutely rubbish at. Rubbish
Right.
at. And you just had to do that, and there was no other options. And certainly as a younger adult, it took me longer to navigate and find the sports that I got my joy from. But that was
Mm,
because I'm just that kind of a person. The system wasn't doing it.
yeah.
And I do think schools need to make sure they offer enough after school, they offer enough sport that children can find their physical outlet that they get their joy from, because we see a huge correlation with children maybe who have DCD who never find that sport. They get obese, mental health problems develop later on in life. So it's actually really important to do all that sampling and find the activity that gives you joy.
So it's not really about an alternative then, is what I'm hearing. Like if you like sport, great, you've got lots of opportunities. If you don't like sport, don't give up on it. Find a sport
Yeah.
that the child does like. But there is an alternate. It needs to be
I think you need to
complementary
do
for all
both.
children.
I think you need to do both. You need to do the creative medium and you need to do the sports
Yeah,
medium. I think
yeah.
they shouldn't be neglected.
That's really interesting because a lot of the parents that I spoke to, and I was kind of like prototyping makers and doers, they were like, "Oh, this is great! It gives them an alternative to not having to go and do the football on the Sundays or the Saturdays, whatever days." And I was like, "Yeah," but it still didn't really sit right with me. And it's really refreshing for me to hear that you're saying that it should be complementary. It's not just an exclusionary exercise.
And maybe that occupies more of their leisure time, the creative,
True.
that's okay. And the same way someone maybe the sports, occupies more of their time, but it's to get the mix
Yeah.
of the two of them is important and can be hard for some children to find that,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Especially in a crowded space, like when you go out on a Saturday morning in your car to drop your kid to a sporting event, you just see how many sporting events have just popped up in the last 10 years. It was the same in Australia, same here. I think the world is kind of like realizing that there's a lot of benefits for this extracurricular activities after school.
Yeah. Yes and
On,
no. I think is you want after school activities,
Hmm,
but you
I'm about to
want
ask the next.
you want that
I,
unstructured time.
I was about to say, but does that come with a risk? And I know from speaking to you before, a little light bulb went off in my head. I wouldn't claim to have a big light bulb going off in my head because, my brain isn't as big as you'd think it is. But you saying to me before that too much and too many of these classes, in
Mm,
terms of structured play, has its disadvantages.
mm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I think you think of what we talk about ideation, being able to figure out how
Mm,
to occupy your time.
yeah,
If we schedule our children, and it's not always the case, some kids can have everything scheduled for them and they're fine, they can figure out, they can occupy, but enough and that they're like, okay, what am I doing today? Where am I going? What activity am I
yeah,
going to? But the skill from a mental health point of view and a learning point of view, the ability to reflect and have time on your own as a child, as an adult, and figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to occupy your time is such an important skill.
mm,
And definitely, as a parent, I can absolutely relate how you need your children occupied because you're working, and they can't
mm,
just be, you know, your child. You want to reduce your child-minding fees as well. So as you can see that from a parent side, and I remember posting an in a parent's WhatsApp or social media forum linked to my own, something like that in my own children's school. Oh, I got eaten, and I went, oh, okay, I want like you're obviously not a working parent, and maybe that free time there's a little bit at the weekend when you're not at work, but you really are empowering your child with powerful skill
yeah.
to
So
be
you
able to
you
go,
you
okay, I've got
recommend it?
an afternoon. Oh, I'm gonna do some painting. I'm just gonna read a book. And being able to quieten ourselves down as well, because
Sure.
you're like a roller coaster and you're up there all the time when you're doing all the activities. And the brain needs to be able to go, okay, I can slow myself down.
Yeah,
You know,
it
that
makes
ability
complete
to
sense
to
when you say it.
to come down is really important, as opposed to, oh, I have to be going all the time. I can't slow down. I can't slow down.
That was in one of the pre-chats we had for this. You were talking about that whole kind of giving space and permission for them to do what they want. And my children are quite young, like they're 4.5 and nearly 7. And I was kind of like, oh, we haven't really done that. Like on
Mm.
Saturday afternoons, it's usually like, okay, let's do something else after a
Yeah.
busy Saturday morning. Whereas now we're starting to weave in some of your advice in terms of, okay, like for the next 2 hours, you get to do what you want.
Mm.
And it could be just letting them play in the garden. It could be letting them do Lego, wherever it is, but the children are finding it difficult. Well, my children are finding it difficult to let go without parental supervision. And
Mm.
I know I'm not alone in this. So, what advice would you give to parents who are trying to incorporate some of the things that we've spoken about today in this episode, and they're struggling with their child's neediness and clinginess, saying, "Come on, mommy, you need to play with me," or "Come on, daddy, push me on the swing." How do you get around that? How do you introduce this without having them kick off and, getting a thump in the head? That's
I think
them
sometimes
thumping
if
me in
the
the head.
adult needs to engage with the child, if they haven't got the ability to play on their
Yeah.
own yet, it's sometimes the adult getting that connect with the child.
Mm,
And getting the child then in that zone where they're nice and regulated and they haven't got attachment and regulation. There's a concept in a framework called sensory attachment intervention by an OT called Aileen Brannock, who's absolutely amazing.
mm,
And she developed this model around sensory attachment for children who've had adverse, childhood experiences.
sure.
And one of the things she's really strong at is the activity that you have shared joy and pleasure. So it's the adult and the child finding something that they can connect and they both can have that shared joy and pleasure with. And with that comes connection, comes regulation. And then when the
Mm,
child is connected and regulated, then they're able to go off a little bit on their own.
okay.
So it's also grading and going, okay, well, maybe they're not able for the 2 hours. Maybe it's just a half an hour. Maybe it's only 10 minutes. So it's
Build it up.
building.
Build it
It's
up.
it's building it up. So it's setting the targets right.
Yeah.
And as a clinician, you have to reflect on that. As a parent, I think you have to, because you can set the bar so high. We're setting ourselves
Oh,
as parents up for failure. You're setting
yeah.
yourself as a professional. Oh God, no, that was, it's like someone saying to me, "You're going to have a 6-pack by the end of the week." Like, that's not
Am
achievable.
I? I haven't done any exercise. How did you know?
Yeah. So we have to set the bar at the right, it's a just right challenge. There's so many
Yeah.
little phrases that I've kept as a therapist from, maybe a clinician I was really influenced, or a course I really did.
Mm,
Things like share joy and pleasure, connect, that connect before you regulate, the share joy and pleasure, the connect, and then what was the other one? What was the other one I was saying?
share joy and
Share joy
pleasure.
and connect before you regulate. The just right challenge.
The just right
The
challenge.
just right challenge, because you can set, like, I could have a session for a child set up with all my goals and
Mm,
all my ideas and all my challenges, and the child could come into the room and I go, "Do you know what, they've had a difficult transition, they're not really in the zone of sitting down and doing this activity. I'm going to have
yeah.
to change tack, so I'm going to have to get my challenge just right as to where they are at, and I have
Hmm.
to connect with where they're at. Then when I connect with where they're at, they're going to be more regulated, then we can challenge."
Okay. In terms of accessing services, it was one of the first things that you called out in terms of the difficulties for parents at the moment, trying to
Yeah.
find the right channel, the right support channel. In some cases, it can take years
Mm.
for a parent to find a resource, and then B, the right resource,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're waiting so long before they can actually experience it. For people at the moment, who may have a sense that their child is neurodiverse, um, what advice do you give them in terms of being able to support them in the interim?
I think it's not jumping the gun to do formal diagnostic assessments straight away.
Mm,
I've had quite a lot of parents who come to me at the end of a journey and they've done so many assessments and they're still none the wiser about how to work with
mm,
their child. I think it's finding a person who can support you to go, okay, where are we at? How can we map where we need to go to? What do we need to do first? What do we need to do next? The HSE run lovely drop-in clinics that can be quite useful. Once a month they do drop-in clinics, and I would
mm,
encourage a lot of parents to do that. In my own practice, I do that quite a lot at the start, and I've turned away people and said, you know what, in your journey, I don't think OT is where we need to start.
yeah.
If I do assessments, I will always try and map out, this is really a priority. This is what we need to look at now, next,
Mm,
mapping that out. But I think as a parent, it's really finding someone who you can connect with on a relational
yeah.
level, because when you get that relational connection, then I think it's much easier to map
To
things out,
support.
and I've seen so many reports from parents and they pay so much money for, and they're
Mm,
not buying into it.
yeah.
But they felt because this person had all these letters after the name, or they so many years of experience that, this person must be right. Not always, not
Yeah.
always. There are some cases that it can be very hard to figure out that diagnosis, and it needs a
Sure.
very skilled team of clinicians as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's not writing off the HSC. There's some, some
No,
nice
no.
things going on within the different areas, drop-in clinics, for OT, for psychology, and their chat. And
Yeah.
they can be good starting places. So to link with someone within either the HSC, if your GP is really good, if you have a
Mm,
private therapist, then listen, I just want to brainstorm and I don't know where to go. And I
sure.
would do that a lot in practice. And it really shifted how I
Mm.
provide services to families.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of start wrapping up the conversation on is the proliferation of Instagram. A lot of
Mm,
parents, myself included, use it. And there's a lot of mums advice out there that maybe have parent or have children who are neurodivergent,
mm.
and they're offering advice. How do you see that playing out?
About social media,
Mm,
definitely mixed about, and there's some wonderful Instagram accounts, and then there's some that I think they're quite fake, they're quite false. It's about how it looks.
mm,
I know myself. I share a little bit on my social media, not a huge amount. I think the pressure to kind of have it look amazing.
yeah,
Have your makeup, have your hair, have your content looking really snazzy, and then getting too generalized in recommendations. And I
yeah,
see a lot of content on social media. And that's to say there's some wonderful stuff, really, really, and it's too generalized. You can generalize some things, but some of it really isn't going to fit for your child. So I think it's not to use that as your Bible. I think it's dip in, dip out.
yeah. My
Um
friend Rachel Deacus, who's a trauma informed design specialist in the White House at the moment, she calls it practicing without a license.
yeah,
And
that's
there's
really
that.
good. That's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a risk when it
Mm,
comes with that. One of the pieces that I just want to go back to, you mentioned there around ideation,
mm,
and the praxis part of the brain really struggles. In the prelude to this, you were saying some people just can't do it. They just
mm,
can't do ideation. And for all the people out there who run workshops, myself included, for clients, I've seen this firsthand. I watch people in, leadership and executive positions being tasked with some stuff that in the design world we'd be like, this
mm,
should be easy enough. And we whisper it and we just watch them stand there and
mm.
like fawn and not be able to actually attempt it. What's happening there? Was that a case of like way back they were unsupported in their development and they weren't able to play, or
It could
what?
be the lid is flipped.
Right, okay. Is it
So
possible if
they
that lid is
so
flipped to
dysregulated.
help them? What can we do
Like
to help them?
it could be at the start of maybe an activity or like a workshop. Have movement.
Right.
Not that movement is the answer. It sounds like movement is the answer for
Yeah,
everything, but it's
exactly.
it's you know it's
It's a
it's it's
Michael Jackson on.
arrogance. It might be doing that, getting that movement. So if someone is coming
The
into
bilateral movements.
lateral movement. Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Well, you think you might go into a workshop and you might be stressed. You might be socially anxious.
yeah,
Some people go into to those social situations. That's people they don't know. So your limbic system gets activated.
right.
Your limbic
Okay.
system gets more activated. And if your limbic system gets activated, as I said, flip the lid. So,
Yeah,
and then you're like, okay, come up with an idea. But your limbic system, it could be even something simple like a really, really cold drink as well. Like the the
yeah,
the,
I
the
remember you
nerve
saying
that
that to
connects,
me. This is
the vagus
amazing.
nerve that connects the gut and the brain. A cold drink, splashing some cold water, settles that down. Breathing. So either there's a
Mm,
big shift to mindfulness and some really, really interesting stuff. But I think doing mindfulness, doing movement before then the more challenging cognitive tasks. So everyone is in that zone. Everyone is in a more regulated zone because everyone
yeah,
will respond different to coming into that environment and the stresses and the unfamiliar as well.
yeah. Suzanne, you could talk about this stuff, and I know you can talk about it for days, okay? How
That's
do
what
you
my
stay?
husband says. Are you not still talking about the same thing?
Yeah. Is it a case that he could ask a question, leave the room, and come back in, and you're still talking about it?
Quite possibly, quite like it's my passion.
I know, yeah,
I
you can
love
hear
the
it.
work I do. I love problem solving. I
Yeah.
love being, there's an OT Kim Bartel who uses the term a behavioral detective. You
Mm,
love trying to figure out, you don't always figure out, but I
mm,
certainly enjoy the the
The
challenge.
challenge.
And
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to ask someone else if I don't know. I'm not a therapist because I know everything. I know a lot.
Yeah.
But I use the parents as a resource. I learn from the parents I work with. You've given me, resources and
Mm.
tips. And I really learn from the children that I work with. And I think
Yeah.
to be that humble in your practice is really, I don't want to present this facade, on Instagram that I'm this, groomed,
Expert.
perfect person. I'm flawed. I have my
Yeah.
character traits that, my personality traits, maybe that, oh, that's not the best. But,
Well, we all think you're brilliant.
oh, thank you very much. But I
We all
think
think you're brilliant.
having that thirst for learning, and it's
Mm.
constantly evolving. I've been an OT for a long time, but I still feel my learning is developing.
Yeah.
And that's why I loved when you were doing, your workshops. Like, oh, that's really exciting. That's really
Yeah.
different. I think that was great.
Where do you go to stay up to date? Like, where are your kind of knowledge pools that you look at and
My
learn from?
peer group, I'm really,
Mm.
really lucky that I have a network of peers within my area, and we'll share ideas. I think
Mhm.
interdisciplinary resources as well. I work,
Yeah.
quite closely with speech and language therapists, psychologists, parents. So I keep up to date multiple ways,
Mm.
social media to some degree, but I can, and you can go down the route, you buy a book that you've seen on social media, and I've done it.
Yeah.
And someone asked me recently about something that I bought through social media and said, "Did you read it?" And I said, "I got to chapter 2."
Right.
So it
You
was
just
marketed, it was really sold, and it was, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. Then I got it and I went, the contents of it,
yeah, bit
you know.
wishy-washy.
So, and obviously, kind of journals, courses, it can get quite difficult when you've been an
Yeah.
OT for as long as I have, because courses that are fresh, courses that are new, there's a certain kind of cycle of courses and suite
Sure.
of courses that go around. So it can be harder.
Mm.
I went to England for a year to train in neurodevelopmental therapy because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just being open. And I think then the knowledge will find you, and having those connections with
Mm.
people that inspire you as well.
Do you want to give a shout out to any books that you think that you're like, that is a good book and that is a recommendation for
Yeah.
any parents or any
I
people just
love The
generally want
Well
to learn?
Balanced Child,
Oh yeah.
by Sally Goddard Bly.
Yeah.
I Which is about all our early life experiences, and our primary reflexes and how that can affect learning. There's another book by an Irish OT, Enos Lawler, Max and Me, a story about sensory processing, which I love, and the kids that come into me love. It's cartoon, and it's about a little boy called Max the Modulator and what it's like to be in his world, but it's very
Nice.
affirmative.
Yeah.
Love those two books.
Okay, nice. I'll find them and put a link to them in the show notes. Suzanne, if
Yeah.
people want to reach out to you and follow you and learn more about what you do, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram.
Yeah.
I think I didn't change my handle. I used to do a group called Master Movers. Um, so I think it's Master Movers
I'll
OT.
find it and I'll put it into the
Yeah.
show notes.
And then my email, SuzanneHanway@gmail.com.
Awesome.
That's always a good starting point.
Suzanne, I wrap every episode up by thanking the guests for their, vulnerability, giving me their time and energy and being put on the spot and being able to speak with somebody like me. I really, really appreciate it because I know you are so busy. Like, if people realize Suzanne Hanway, like the demand for Suzanne Hanway is through the stratosphere. So to give me an hour of your time, I really, really appreciate it. So keep doing the great work that you're doing. And in the future, you're always welcome back to the
I've
podcast.
really enjoyed it. And it's really interesting, just to kind of finish up. I was getting ready to come, and I was putting on this kind of more formal shirt.
Yeah.
And I looked at myself, I said, "Oh, that's not giving me joy." And my favorite color is orange. And
It
this is
looks
not
good.
remotely a work, like if you want to present a facade. And I went, you know what? It's giving me joy, and I'm
Yeah.
going to be in the zone. I'm going to be
Yeah.
comfortable, as opposed to this, quite stuffy shirt that might have looked
Yeah.
very professional. And I went, I want to have joy. I want to show the real me, and I want to be in the zone and not be
That's great to
nervous,
do that
not be worried.
because
Yeah.
everyone who listens and watches on this podcast, they're all about, kind of presenting their best self. So,
Yeah.
you're living the mantra. Suzanne, thanks so much.
Listen, thanks a million. Bye.